Today we have a presentation where we'll be looking at the 2025 Index of Economic Freedom. Some of you may have attended our previous sessions on this same report. So the IEF or the Index of Economic Freedom is a report that is published annually by the Heritage Foundation. They've been doing this since 1994, and we are currently on the 31st edition. The IEA has been tracking this for some time, but we formally started doing preparing presentations and sharing our insights from 2020. So this should be our 6th year of presenting to you this analysis. So some of you may be already aware about the drill, the methodology, but we'll come to that. So Leo and I will be making this presentation in 2 parts. We can go to the outline, and in terms of the outline, that's how we intend to structure the discussion today. We start with the global outlook or the global results, and I'll talk briefly about the methodology of the index, and then we will look at Kenya's results broadly, and Leo will come in and provide specific analysis of Kenyan results, as well as the comparative analysis with the EAC region. So we have the presentation is structured like that, and then we also later will have we'll discuss some reforms, some of the specific reforms that will be required to strengthen economic freedoms in Kenya and the region, and then we'll come to our conclusions. So that's the outline, and we go now straight to the report. As I mentioned, this is the 31st edition of the Index of Economic Freedom. And before I actually go into specifically why we've been tracking this report, I wanted to mention briefly that just for the benefit of those of you who've not attended our previous webinars, we make the assumption, and the reason we didn't include a slide on that is because we make the assumption that most of you have already engaged with this report previously, perhaps through us, but for those who haven't, so it basically uses data from different sectors. The Heritage Foundation collects data from all the states that are ranked, so 184 different countries. They collect data from business, trade, governance, and policy, and then this data is structured in terms of 4 broad pillars that I'll also talk about shortly in the methodology, and they classify certain economic freedoms from this data, and so countries that have a higher score from the way it's computed, countries that tend to have a higher score are those that have more or where there's more economic freedom. So instances where we have business-friendly environments, the tax code is more predictable and friendly in a country, for instance, governments that encourage innovation and entrepreneurship. So certain categories, we look at the 4 pillars and the 12 economic freedoms. So those 4 the 12 economic freedoms are classified along the 4 broad pillars, and then a ranking is provided as a measure of the state of economic freedom in each of the countries. So for the last couple of years, we've had 184 countries being ranked. And then in terms of I think I can talk about the interpretation maybe of the scores a little. Okay, no, let me just talk about the interpretation of the scores here. So based on the way they're ranked, the countries that have the highest scores, so those that score above 80 are ranked as free. So remember, it's the Index of Economic Freedom. So in terms of economic freedoms, they are categorized as free. And then the states that fall within a score whose score is between 70 and 79.9, those are ranked as or are categorized as mostly free. And then the countries that fall between the score of 60 and 69.9, those are moderately free. And then we have 50 to 59.9, those are mostly unfree, and then below 50 are repressed economies. So if you could remember that because we'll talk about scores for Kenya and for the EAC, but we have not provided the specific slide on that calculation. So that's the way the categorization is done. And then in addition to like the higher levels of prosperity, what this index has shown us consistently, because we've been tracking this over time, as I've mentioned, is that the countries that tend to have higher scores, or those that enjoy greater economic freedoms, it relates very closely with the high levels of prosperity. And this is in terms of, if you look at measurements in terms of per capita income, health outcomes, different health outcomes. Their index also talks about environmental outcomes. Like these nations broadly tend to just simply have better outcomes overall that are linked to prosperity. So I wanted to get that out of the way first, and then now we can go to the background in terms of why we've been measuring this index. So we've discussed this 5 reasons. We've discussed the reasons why the IE has been tracking this. So the first is that in the constitution, under the constitution of Kenya 2010, we have economic rights are guaranteed there. In addition to all the other basic rights, we have economic rights are provided by the constitution. And so by virtue of, we have socioeconomic rights, we have other rights that are related, for instance, property rights, and so on. The rights that would fall clearly under the 12 economic freedoms here, most of them are articulated either expressly or implied under the Constitution of Kenya. So because of that constitutional requirement, there's need for those rights to be protected and to be advanced. So that's the first one. And then we have stated here previously that this index provides a good basis for comparison. So in terms of seeing how countries are performing, looking at the ranking, and I've already said that it's greater economic freedom is linked to greater prosperity, which we agree with largely. We agree with actually fully as IEA. So for that reason, it's important to see why the countries that are performing better, what policies they have in place, and then countries can use this to improve their own scores. Then the third reason, it's basically a helpful tool in assessing the constitutional order that is linked to the first that I've spoken about. And then I've already explained that it's economic freedoms are a necessary path to greater prosperity. And I think we've seen that. So the IEF has provided a benchmark for looking at countries that are more prosperous. The economic freedoms there are, there's to a greater extent, they enjoy greater economic freedom. And then basically the other one is to help us assess how close Kenya and the EAC governments are to achieving effectiveness. So in a nutshell, that's how we summarize why we've been tracking this. So it helps us to examine the effectiveness of basically states' interaction with citizens, and basically the progress towards economic prosperity and transformation. So that's the background. Then we go to how the index is measured. Again, we have looked at this previously. But I'll just repeat for those of you who might be new here. So we have 4 broad pillars. So the IEF looks at economic policies and conditions among countries and all the countries that are assessed, and then the impact of those freedoms on growth and prosperity. So it's measured across 4 pillars, and we have the first being the rule of law. We also have the second pillar is on government size, and then I'll come to the other one is on the rule of law, and then we have the rule of law, we have government size, and then we have regulatory efficiency and open markets. But so that's the pillar, and then we have now the specific economic freedoms that are for each of these four pillars, we have three economic freedoms. And so for the first one, for instance, under the rule of law, we have property rights. They measure physical property rights, intellectual property rights, in quality of land administration, and the rules, the regulatory framework on land use and control. So the whole regime on property rights is fundamental to basically it's a fundamental pillar of economic freedom. So that's the first pillar under the rule of law category. Then this category also measures judicial effectiveness as an economic right. And here they look at independence of the judicial institutions, or rather the judiciary in different countries, then the quality of the judicial process, transparency, openness, accountability, and so on, favoritism in obtaining judicial decisions and such things. So obviously, the less open or the more challenges, then the lower the rank that is given for the measure of that particular freedom. And then we have government integrity as another factor. And here, they basically look at irregular payments and bribes, transparency in the policy-making processes, corruption, presence or absence of it, the perceptions of corruption, and basically transparency as a whole. So under the rule of law category, those are the three things that are usually measured. And before I preempt the results, I think we have seen over the last 3 years that most states have performed very poorly, and including the Kenyan country on this category under the rule of law. So our worst scores, just telling you in advance, are usually on this category. So be keen when we come to the specific results. Then the other pillar is on government size. So here the IEF measures those three things. So the tax burden. So specifically the top marginal tax rate on individual income, the top marginal tax rate on corporate income, the total tax burden as a percentage of GDP. So obviously the greater the burden, then it means there's less space for persons and firms to use their resources for other needs. So that is obviously ranked. Countries that have a greater tax burden are ranked lower, and under this report. Then we have government spending. So expenditures represent the average total government spending at all levels as a percentage of GDP for the most recent 3 years. So the soundness of government spending and the size quantum is measured to check, to compare what implications it has on basically on individual persons' resources. We know, so greater government spending, or how do I explain this? Larger government spending, uncontrolled and sound spending will obviously receive poorer scores than where we have sound policies guiding the total spending. Then we have fiscal health as another factor. So, and here the IEF basically looks at the average deficits as a percentage of GDP for the last 3 years, and then provides a score. So obviously, again, poorer fiscal health will attract a lower score in terms of the freedoms. Then we go to the last two. So rule of law, government size, and then the next is regulatory efficiency. And here we have three freedoms that are measured or factors. And here it's the index looks at business freedom, you can see the things that are measured there, 13 sub-factors, which include time, cost, procedures of setting up businesses, how friendly is the regulatory framework with regards to businesses, does it encourage entrepreneurship, what do is it cumbersome, or is compliance a problem? So the more cumbersome the procedures, the less the scores would be, and the more open and free and easy, the easier it is to set up businesses, then obviously countries would receive a better score for that. Then labor freedom. So these are basic freedoms related to enjoyment of labor rights, and the friendlier the labor rights or freedoms, the better the scores would be. And then we have monetary freedom. So this is the weighted average inflation rate for the most recent 3 years, qualitative judgment on extent of government manipulation of prices through direct controls or subsidies. So the IEF is premised on the fact that greater economic freedoms or the less government intervention, the better the environment as a whole is for businesses to operate, for individuals, firms in total. So the better. So the more intervention we see in terms of monetary policies, the lower the scores would be for this ranking. So yeah, it should be understood like that. And then the last category is on open markets. And here we have 3 freedoms again being measured. So that's the trade freedoms. So the trade weighted average tariff rates, the qualitative evaluation of non-tariff barriers, and again, a similar reasoning that the greater the trade freedoms, the less the tariffs, the less non-tariff barriers, then the more this is ranked as more economic freedom, and which obviously attracts better scores. And then investment freedom. So that's how nations treat the national treatment of foreign investment. The foreign investment code restrictions related to land ownership for investment, foreign exchange controls, capital controls. So those are the things that the index looks at. And then lastly, we have the financial freedom. And here it's basically the extent of government regulation of financial services. And the index also looks at the degree of intervention, state intervention in banks and other firms through direct and indirect ownership, government influence on allocation of credit, the extent of financial and capital market development, and openness to foreign competition. So for all these freedoms, again, the ranking is done from the perspective that the more restrictive the regulatory framework or the more intervention we see from government, the lower the scores would be, because those generally discourage investment, discourage growth, and that has been shown over time. So that's on how the index is measured. I already told you how the scores are done. So from 0 to 100, with 80 and above being the best that a country could score, because that's a free economy. And then 50 and below is repressed. And then in between, we have the other categories. So go to the next one. So these are not looking at the specific results for the 2025 index. So these are the top 4 countries this year. So we had only, actually, these countries tend to alternate, but like over the last 3 years, they have remained as the same countries, just some getting different countries being getting the top position. So globally this year, Singapore was ranked first with a score of 84.5, and then we had Switzerland second, Ireland, and lastly, the fourth was Taiwan. So the first three, because they have a score of 80 and above, are ranked as free, and they're the only ones in the category of free for this year's index. And then Taiwan, very close to free, but it's not there. It's mostly free. So because the countries that are ranked above 70 but below 80 are mostly free, still a good performance. And if you read the report in detail, you'll see that these economies demonstrate more openness. There's greater economic openness. If you look at the governance quality, if you look at the standards of living in those countries, there's a very strong correlation between the greater economic freedom as measured here and the level of prosperity that is seen in these countries. So those are the top four. Then going to the next, while the global average for the IEF scores this year, there was like a very slight improvement, but that is just from last year's scores to this year's score. There was a very marginal improvement. But if you look at the broader scale of things, from the progress that we have seen from the year 2000 and going to right up to where we are now in 2025, we noticed that there's a concerning trend, which is shown in the fact that there's actually a general decline in economic freedom. So it's like globally we see that we can say that the world is becoming less free in terms of the economic freedom perspective. So this chart basically shows us that shift in the global outlook from 2000 to 2025. And if you look at the color categorization alone, you'll be able to tell that because you can see that majority of the world is now moving towards the mostly unfree category. So on this chart, the green, the very dark green is the free, but those are very few, and that's why it's difficult to actually spot them. But if you remember the other chart, so we had those three, Singapore, Switzerland, and Ireland. So those are the only ones that are free. And then the lighter green is mostly free, above 70 score. So this chart is looking at the difference. The color will show you the decline, moving from the free and mostly free and tending towards the other colors, which are represented by moderately free, the lighter, I guess, yellowish. The yellowish is the moderately free, which is the scores of 60, but mostly unfree, which now dominates the 2025 picture, is the countries that fall within the score of the 50s. So those are mostly unfree. And if you look at the difference there, you can see that the second chart, it's predominantly more orange, showing that the world as a whole is retrogressing. It's moving towards the mostly unfree. And then the dark red, the red color is repressed states. We also have I don't know whether the picture here, it's like a mixed picture, but we still have many states still falling within the repressed category. But I think the most clear one is that movement towards the orange, which is more countries now falling in the mostly unfree category. And the factors that have been attributed to this are you'll see the decline when we present like specific findings, but the factors that have been presented that have been attributed to this is things like governance challenges, fiscal stress. There's more interventionism, rising interventionism by governments in the operations of farms and businesses, and basically just rising interventionism. This and poorer fiscal health, greater public debt amongst many states. So those are some of the challenges that have led to that change. And this concept, for us as the CLE program, this worries us because, as we have seen, the more intervention the more intervention we see from government and the less the freedoms, then it means the less it has worse outcomes for individuals. So welfare outcomes, less growth. That is what the decline in economic freedoms translates to for the ordinary person. So I think, yeah, so that's the global picture. And then this is my last slide. So this is the overall result for Kenya, the overall picture. So this chart basically shows Kenya's performance has mostly been stagnating. I think we've always been in that category of mostly unfree, but sometimes there's a slight decline, sometimes there's slight marginal improvements. But so as you can see, our overall score for this year was 54.8. And obviously this falls within the mostly unfree category. 54.8 is closer to 50 or less than 50 than it is to 60. So we are closer to repressed than we are to moderately free. So I think there's a lot that could be done in terms of improving the overall regulatory and institutional framework that has contributed to this ranking. And Leo will provide you with specific details in terms of our performance, but I think that general trend shows persistent weaknesses with respect to all the economic freedoms, but we've tended to perform worse in certain areas like the rule of law categories, government integrity, fiscal health, judicial effectiveness, and property rights. Those are our worst performing areas. But I welcome Leo now to explain to you exactly why and show you those charts. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Please confirm that you can hear me and that I'm
I
audible.
can. Yes, I can hear you and see you loud and clear. Yeah.
Thank you. Now Jackie has provided the overall the global picture, the index and the methodology, how it's measured. Jackie has also provided the overall result for Kenya and giving us the indication that the global economy, in the global economy, the world is starting to become unfree. Now, this is an area for concern. Now, to provide the Kenya specific results, you realize that for the rule of law category, Kenya is considered repressed. And for these very simple reasons that for property rights, a score of 41.8, way below the world average. Judicial effectiveness, a score 48. Additionally, the score on government integrity, 31.5. Jackie explained that, as you all know, for property rights, it's actually physical property rights, intellectual property rights, the strength of investor protection, risk of expropriation, and quality of land administration. And you realize in those categories where there's significant weaknesses are areas, for example, like the quality of land administration. Several other reviews done, for example, on land administration, have found that there are extensive weaknesses with how land is administered, the registry, the integrity of the registry, the challenges, the rent-seeking challenges thereof, and there are significant concerns around that. Government had in the past tried to introduce reforms like Ardhi, which was supposed to be a uniform platform that would be able to meet the condition, the quality checks for how land is administered, but that is yet to yield significant fruit. The other issues on fiscal physical property rights, the issues on how trademarks are issued, copyright infringements. You even see, if you've seen today's newspaper, Business Daily, there are concerns that Kenya is becoming actually the destination for that for counterfeit items and that and that kind of the thing. So those are challenges around the issues on property rights. On judicial effectiveness, it's the quality of judicial decisions, issues of judicial independence, and favoritism. So, and there are other ancillary issues. There are other main issues uh, on the same. One of them being case backlogs. That those case backlogs are starting to have been affecting for a very long time the quality of judicial decisions. So, for example, that unless for urgent matters, you might get that towards the after some time, but for other matters to come to trial, if you file an issue today, you might not get an hearing date this year. You might get hearing dates next year. So that affects the quality of judicial decisions. And you remember, judicial decisions affect how people assert constitutional rights. One of them being the issue of property rights. Another thing also that affects judicial decisions is the issue of rent seeking, the issue of corruption. There's a problem, uh, uh, and those are some of the things that Parliament should be able to deal with. Uh, for example, that one thing could be ensuring that there are vetting cycles within the life cycle of a judge. Um, on government integrity, I don't need to belabor this. I know most Kenyans and most people on this call understand the problem with government integrity. In this measure, the index measures irregular payments and bribes, transparency of government decision making, absence of corruption, perceptions of corruption within government. And there are significant challenges. One of the issues where the Institute of Economic Affairs has identified a significant policy problem is the question around procurement fraud, fiscal leakages through procurement fraud. And we've extensively evaluated the public procurement system and how that interfaces with the public finance management system, and how the weaknesses, for example, that procurement officers have accounting officers have significant discretion. They also have significant discretion. They're able to choose a type of procurement from 18 types of procurement allowed in law, and the process is manual. The process is also volumetric, and there are too many procuring entities that makes it harder for Auditor General and investigative agencies to be able to follow and catch up. And that's why this problem can only be prevented from the prevention side rather than following the money after it has left government. So that is one area. The question about corruption, that is evident. If you look at that, the corruption perception index, and Kenya has performed dismally in the last 30 years. Now, Kenya performs relatively better but still way below the global when it comes to tax burden and government spending. So, uh, 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 but performs poorly in relation to fiscal health. Fiscal health measures two indicators, one being the debt stock and the second part being deficits. Remember, deficits is actually it's borrowing, and then 80% of the score takes up comes from is taken up by deficits, and then 20% is taken up by the total size of debt stock. Currently, Kenya is under a debt distress, is in a debt distress, and also deficits are above the benchmark of 3%. Another thing is on questions of business freedom, labor freedom. As Jackie explained, business freedom measures a variety of other factors. There are like 13 sub-factors, which includes now time, the cost as of starting a business, as a share of income per capita, the procedures. Kenya has a score of 58.9, which is moderately and free, and is below the global average. On labor freedom, we are the global average, but again, labor freedom measures a variety of labor market indicators, one being how that's the ratio of minimum wage to average value had. It measures the hindrance to hire additional workers, the length of severance notice, and many other factors. So we still underperform compared to the global average. If you compare to our peers, it's even worse that Kenya underperforms relative to the peers. If you look at other factors, trade freedom, you can see the line above on trade freedom, just close to 70, and Kenya is at 56.6. That's if you take the global average of and 56.6, and trade freedom is the tariff, the average weighted tariff, and then qualitative evaluation of the non-trade barriers. So, for example, Kenya is in the COMESA, is in COMESA, is in the EAC, SCFTA. But when you look at the trade posture that Kenya has taken to agricultural goods, it's still heavily regulated, and quotas have been put in place largely to protect the local industry. And that in itself is affecting both the consumer on one side, but also it's holding back because once the international trade fails to discipline competition, it fails to discipline uh, and competitiveness of local industries, uh, economic freedoms have been affected in a way that that makes it terrible. So, and that's why you look at it at that. So, similar to investment freedom, on the investment side, they're looking at the way national treatment of foreign investment code, restrictions on land ownership. Remember, our constitution restricts foreign land ownership, but the constitution only allows foreign land owners to lease, and also sectoral investment restrictions, expropriation of investments without compensation, foreign exchange controls, and also capital controls. We don't have a problem largely with the others, but the investment code is relative. If you look at subsidiary legislation, one of the factors that the IEA has evaluated, if you look at, there is a huge quantum of subsidiary legislation that makes it difficult for foreign owners to comply with all the other issues. Now we look at the EAC comparative analysis. Now, if you look at the overall result, the best if the overall result in for 2025, Kenya is Kenya ties together with Rwanda, but Tanzania is ahead, and while DRC, and the final one being Burundi. Burundi is in the repressed region. But the entire EAC story the entire EAC story is that majority of them are in what we call moderately, are in the mod and free, and are considered and free in terms of economic freedoms. So it's not it well, if you use the uh, league, it's we informal language, we can say this is like a farmers league. It's a you can't compare, you are not comparing the best. There's it's because even if you compare all of them, it's still suboptimal. But the two lagging countries DRC for DRC and also Burundi. We've not included South Sudan for obvious reasons, because largely South Sudan is still politically unstable, and they're experiencing that. So we want to discreetly now go into some of the selected economic freedoms so that you are able to see what informs this overall result. So if you look at property rights, and its enforcement, Kenya still leads the pack with a score of 62, while the others, all the other EAC countries are in the repressed region, a score of 50 and below. That's why you can see, actually, Rwanda leads the pack, while the others are in the region of moderately are considered repressed, and that's why you see DRC with a score of 15.6, unstable. Same to Burundi, and the others, Tanzania, and the EAC story around enforcement of property rights, and especially for the Kenyan story, it's the fragility of the state. Especially for Kenya, it's the fragility of the state, because you'd realize some of the things like, and I want to emphasize this, like the land registry at the Ministry of Lands. That should be the most sacred, and it should be one of the places where documents are not questioned, or there's some level of integrity. And then there cannot be, for example, two people owning the same piece of land. And that also applies to trademarks. How trademarks are issued, how patents are issued, how similar the similar ones are enforced. And that also applies to how for import controls, counterfeits, how the country is able to deal with counterfeits, the ability to be able to protect those intellectual property questions. And that's, you see it in that way. And when on the other side, if the courts are faced with a significant case backlog system, that they are not able to resolve those questions within an easy time frame, it generates this kind of a result. But the entire EAC story, it's still, you cannot see countries that have a score of more than 80 and 80 and above. Judicial effectiveness, when the index of economic freedom was started in 1994, they did not, judicial effectiveness was not one of the measures that was done, but it was introduced in 2015. And if you look at that, all EAC countries are considered repressed, and for reasons I've listed, there's clear favoritism there's clear favoritism in how those decisions are issued. There's adverse rent seeking. There's political interference. Some of them have to posture to the executive to be able to get uh, 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 to be able to get to that. So if you look at all of them, and there are those at Burundi and DRC are in a worse of position, and because you because of this, most of those states are in what we call they're in the most fragile position. Again, another indicator is the labor freedom introduced in 2005, and other countries, some data for countries like DRC were collected after 2007, were added into the index after 2007. But you can see that most of them, some of them are just above the repressed, between repressed and moderately and free. And Tanzania leads the pack, followed by Tanzania leads the pack, followed by Kenya and Rwanda. And Rwanda and Burundi are almost share the same score, considered repressed, considered repressed. And here, it's just the ability to be able to, because for labor freedoms, it's easy to, some of it are embedded, some of the reforms that could be done are embedded in the law. So like legally mandated notice period, issues like the mandatory severance pay. Some countries do not have that. Their labor force participation rate, majority of these countries, most of them are in the informal sector, and the labor force participation rate is still low, and it's also tied to the economic performance. And then there are other questions like difficulty in firing employees, rigidity of hours. So some of it is in the legal side, some of it is tied to economic performance, but also the others are uh, 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 that decent wage, because ratio of the minimum wage to the average value had per worker. So another one is on investment freedom. Again, the score is between between and free to others being in the repressed region. Investment freedom, as Jackie explained, is how that the national treatment of foreign investment, the foreign investment code, and also the restrictions on land ownership, sectoral investment restrictions, expropriations of investments. So you see a country like DRC, they have specific sectoral investment restrictions. Foreign firms, a percentage of foreign firms have to be owned by locals. And you even saw this week again, Kenyan firms have been forced for them to continue to operate. They will have to sell, to divest part of it to the to they'll have to divest part of it to DRC citizens and farms in DRC. So again, and that's why you see it is in considered repressed. And so you see some other countries there's a sharp fall for Uganda between 50 to 40. And it's partly tied to retrogressive reforms that that they did. But the others are just above for Burundi, just at the repressed region. But Kenya leads and Kenya and Rwanda leads the pack with this. But all of them are still considered moderately and free. And because of those simple issues, that political undertones actually precede good economic policy when it comes to to national investment, to foreign investment. So part of it is the EAC economies must completely, and I want, so as part of it, as emphasizing the principle of free markets, EAC economies must completely liberalize and allow their own firms to be able to compete, and that would mean doing away with most of these restrictions around national investment. So there's a World Bank study that was done in 2016 on a diagnostic of Kenyan farms. They found out that some of the Kenyan farms that could be categorized largely into two groups, what they called laggards, and then laggards for those that lag behind, and on the other side, some of them that they called winners. So some of those, for laggards, they actually depended they were dependent on state policy for them to survive. And for the other group, they could even compete in upper and middle income economies. So you leave some of those farms in upper and middle income economies, they could compete and survive on their own. So rethinking the issues around investment freedom would actually yield a better case. Then for business freedom, this is the cost, time, and the process and procedure around starting a business, and all of them are considered between the moderately and free in the unfree region, but and some of others are in the repressed region. This includes Burundi and DRC. So if you look at that, most of them are tying around that. But again, to emphasize on the issues of business freedom, it's largely government's regulatory fiat and how that is applied. And so just to comment on the case of Kenya, majority of these of Kenyan farms survive on, so like you're being given an example of a state agency that regulates biosafety. So let me give just to give another example. We're being given that some farms are regulated by more than 20 regulatory agencies. So imagining that getting a license from 18 regulatory agencies, satisfying the Kenya Revenue Administration, in addition to Kenya Revenue Administration, Business Registration Service, and meeting all those conditions. Part of it is that business freedom. Is largely a problem, or so counties are starting to charge for business licenses, and they're charging business licenses in a unified format. Part of it, they are committing to collect garbage, provide fire services, but there's an optimal provision of that kind of those services. So part of it, so that is a problem that keeps compounding, and the only way that these problems is is to rethink that we can only have a business a code for starting businesses in Kenya that should be less than 20 pages, not more than 20 pages. And all those requirements, so counties can limit and there has to be a limit on how regulation is done, but also there has to be especially where there should be no regulation in place. Uh, Parliament needs to evaluate the entire business code to be able to get rid of those regulations that should not be there in the first place. And regulations are easy. Regulations should only happen because of a, a negative externality, which is harm that the society faces directly. But the others need to be taken out for that. Now, there's a case for economic freedoms. And the reason why I here focuses on this, and just to reiterate what Jackie has mentioned, is this is based on the basis of data. So if you look at, for example, if we speak about trade freedom, we are speaking about average weighted tariff. And remember, tariffs are taxes and taxes on Kenyans. On Kenyans. If Kenya has an higher tariff rate, that's a tax on Kenya. And that is also not just a tax on Kenya, it's a tax on Kenyan value chains. It's a tax on if there is a tax, it's a tax on intermediate goods. And so those and there is evidence. So that will not be an arbitrary number. It will be a tax. A tariff will now be a tax. A tariff would be a direct. Would be a number. Somebody would just pick from that. So the index of economic freedoms gives us a better picture of what is happening. And if you looked at the top 4 countries, they with high economic freedoms, they also had the fastest. They've also had the fastest growth in the last 20 years. Free economies show higher incomes and better living standards than mostly and free. Low economic freedoms are also linked to poverty rates. And even if you compare Kenya together with the peers, you'll see Kenya is also lagging behind. If you compare Kenya together with the EAC region, in the EAC region, you'll see others like Burundi also lagging behind. There are strong property rights and open markets attract FDI. And then fewer regulations spur entrepreneurship. They also correlate with longer life expectancy. And also enhancing the rule of law and fiscal health can lift the score, the EAC scores. So by just bringing deficits to lower than 3%, to lower than 3%, and reducing that debt stock improves the fiscal health score over time. We wanted to show another. This is a chart from the bigger report, and one of the things that we're able to see is that those countries that have lost economic freedoms have slowed in terms of economic growth. That's why you see increasing economic. If you increase for those that increase if you increase economic growth, if you increase economic freedoms, there was an higher the annual GDP in purchasing power parity terms grew by for the past 20 years 3.9% compared to those who are losing economic freedoms 3.2. And you can for the past 5 years for the past 10 years. So in long run, countries that actually increased economic freedoms have had better growth outlook. Now, so we this year we tried to think about Kenya specific reforms. What should Kenya do? Part of it would be trade openness, opening up trade. Average weighted tariffs of less than 3%. Streamline customs. Streamline customs. Enter into many free trade agreements with Kenya's trade partners. Simplify regulations. We are saying that part of it is subsidiary legislations processed by the delegated legislation committees in parliament should be done away at least by 70%. By 70%. So, and then judicial effectiveness, clear case backlog, deal with rent seeking. And we have to emphasize this. Parliament should deal with rent seeking within the judiciary by introducing vetting cycles every 10 years. Another issue is on tax burden. Remove the use of tax amendments in every cycle. Remove regressive taxes and require the use of evidence in the tax amendment. So if before Parliament brings any tax, before there is any tax amendment in Parliament, there should be evidence, concrete evidence, empirical evidence of why that tax should be reviewed one way or the other. Obviously, for regressive taxes, majority of indirect taxes have had this evidence even from National Treasury Public Expenditure Review reports that regressive taxes actually have had disproportionate effect on low income households. So, and for those majority of what is always proposed is that some of those indirect taxes should be very low and it should be very low rates. Address the question of fiscal distress by pursuing growth. Majority of while controlling spending. Majority of the debate around debt resolution in Kenya have largely focused on spending on the spending side, but there needs to be a broader diagnosis on the growth side because the way countries are not like farms. You know, for a farm, you can restructure debt. If you are in debt distress, restructure debt. You restructure debt. You can sell off a division. So there are various ways. For a country, you cannot uh, uh, pursue that. But for a country, part of what countries do is the economy grows faster at a faster pace than debt, and that allows the debt as a debt stock as a share of GDP to become smaller, and also interest payments as a share of revenue to become smaller. That's how countries resolve debt. Resolve debt. So, and there are other reforms that can be put in place. Privatization. We look at state corporations, what they are doing, and that kind of the thing. And other reforms in the general economy that enable markets to allow to allocate capital without government interference. And here again, it's a problem of debt. You've had this expression what people call lazy banking, where bankers in Kenya are willing and quickly and very available to lend to government than to lend to the other to people in the general economy for obvious reasons, incentives. By that, so that they by just letting markets to allocate capital, proper financial intermediation to work. So they and fiscal policy should not interfere in the way in the performance of the economy as it has had. And then make Kenya an open market economy. We cannot, okay, most people say Kenya is a market economy. But if you look at the other indicators, the openness, and the others, it largely we can Kenya is not considered as that. And then there is a problem of leakages, fiscal leakages, problems of procurement fraud. There's been an evaluation by the Auditor General on the Public Finance Management System, IFMIS, by the Auditor General and also the Trade USTR, the office of the USTR. They normally do a large global report, and if misappeared as part of if misappeared as that as one of those systems that was not foolproof and susceptible to hacking and that kind. So that needs to be overhauled. And the payment part and the procurement process part needs to go hand in hand. You've looked at uh, uh, stored projects across the country. Some of them have never started. Some of them have started and are midway. Substantial, enormous amounts of public resources have already been spent. And then there is another problem that needs to address that fiscal leakage, and also it will affect the government integrity score, is independent economic appraisal for all significant projects. If you count some of the largest projects, like one of them being the standard gauge railway, which at that time when it was done, it was 5% of Kenya's GDP. If an independent economic appraisal, there's an appraisal that was done by World Bank that showed the 5 options. If an independent appraisal had been done, SGR would not be here today. And that if that independent appraisal played a big role in the decision, and probably there would be a better outcome, like a better road from Mombasa all the way to Malaba. So those are some of the things: monetary freedom, reduced GOK interventions in the market, and government interventions will always be limited. Uh, 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 liberalize the market. Liberalize the market. You know, there's a problem with interbank. There's a new monetary transmission mechanism in place. Part of that should be complete liberalization. That, and then use market-based instruments. Reduce GOK dependence on the bond market, and that also means the fiscal policy side has to be adjusted. So you cannot and that cannot be that those two should not go cannot go hand in hand. And use market instruments on the general economy to reduce effects on monetary policy. So, in conclusion, what you are saying is that the weaknesses in government integrity are spilling into those other issues, resulting in judicial ineffectiveness and weak property rights. And we also dare to say this, that Kenya's state fragility, and also state fragility within EAC is continuing to weaken from time to time. And the economic factors, uh, uh, but also institutional factors are colliding together to exacerbate that problem. Then another thing will be focus on inclusive institutions. And by inclusive institutions, we mean institutions that strengthen economic freedoms. Economic freedoms. You all know the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics was issued to Darren Aksumolu and Simon Johnson for their work in building around what they call this inclusive institution. They use history of the economics of history, but also used empirical data to show that freer societies, uh, freer societies were able to build inclusive economic institutions, and those institutions allowed now prosperity to occur. And even they were able, in building those inclusive institutions, but to deal with other issues like equity, that equity and inclusivity. But if you compare to predatory institutions, predatory, uh, uh, the other institutions, most of them, most of those countries have never been able to, and they gave very good examples, like they gave many examples from colonialism, the and many other factors that played a factor in that kind of in those kind of institutions. Predictability by elevating constitutionalism and rule of law because those institutions are the ones that will that should precede anything. If we at the Institute for the Constitutional Law and Economy program, we call them the institutions of the Constitution, the institutions of the Constitutions, property rights, freedom of speech, a fair administrative action, public participation. All those institutions of the Constitution, all those, if will in the end would be able to uh, play a big role in that prosperity. Thank you so much. Back to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Leo. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So I do not think there's any need for me to recap what we've told you. So basically, that's our analysis of the 2025 Index of Economic Freedom. And as you've seen, we focused on Kenya's results, EAC results, and just a little mention of the global picture. So we go now to plenary. We're a little behind time as we intended to close at 12:30, but we welcome any questions. If anyone would like to have any clarification made, if there's something that is unclear to you, you can raise your hand. Yes, you'll be able to unmute yourself and you can raise your hand. So does anyone have any question that you'd like us to respond to? Is anything unclear? So we can start with what was in the chat box. I had asked you to note down some questions here. So there was only one where Timothy was asking, it was indicated, he said that it was indicated that Kenya is in debt distress. Please clarify the parameters used to determine debt distress. So I think Leo mentioned that when he was looking at specific results, and I attempted a response, which we can provide more detail to as we wait for other questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll allow you to ask. So Leo, would you like to respond to Timothy? I attempted a response, but would you like to provide greater detail regarding the current indicators of high risk of debt distress?
Yeah, I think you provided a sufficient example how it's measured, but I just to give an example so that people can think about it. So you realize that for Kenya, I just want to give numbers for Kenya so that so you realize that interest payment on debt cross over $1 trillion shillings. If you look at ordinary revenue, projected around 2.5 trillion shillings. So 1 trillion out of that 2.5 trillion is already gone to debt. So because government pays for expenses from from revenue, from revenue. If already that 1.5 is already remaining, 1.1 trillion goes to wages. So 400 billion is out of that is what is available. And out of that, now 400 billion is supposed to pay for counties, judiciary, parliament, pay for education, pay for all that. So you already see that that's distress. Government of Kenya started to borrow to pay for recurrent expenses as way back in 2019. 2019. So, and in essence, if you look at PFM, government is not allowed to pay for to pay for recurrent expenditure. So already paying to pay for those. So that distress, that's that is what you call the debt distress. Everything is urgent. And then you'll also look at some of the things that government is supposed to do, like pensions. They started becoming late. If you look at pensions, the Auditor General measured in, if you look at the 2023-24 audit of the pension, CFS pensions, government is supposed to pay within 90 days pensions after the filing of claim. They pay close to 200 days, 190 something days. So that's a level of distress, and now it's affecting the other part. Yeah, but that is the explanation that Jackie has given. Thank you.
So debt service to revenue ratios, debt to GDP ratio, the liquidity indicators are all indicators of whether a country is at high risk of debt distress. And what we are saying is because government pays back debt from its revenues and not its GDP, then when we have a very substantial amount going to repayment of debt and not providing essential services and not providing public goods, when the government is unable to pay salaries, unable to pay pensioners, unable to settle those primary obligations, then for all intents and purposes, then we can say that the country is at high risk. It's actually in debt distress. So I think we have answered you very sufficiently. Jairus asks on slide 13 on property rights, what explains the jump from around 2016 for most of the EAC countries? So I've just relooked at it, and there's yes, the data, the chart shows that there was a marked improvement in the scores for property rights. So I think, and Leo will add to this, the main thing around then is when we started seeing quite a bit of reforms related to property, related to land ownership, digitization of records, and so several countries, I know Uganda did, DRC did, started digitizing land records, started implementing some reforms related to land. So some of these improvements, most of these improvements are related to property, but in terms of land ownership. We've had a new constitution from 2010, but most of those reforms, even in Kenya, started being implemented around that period. So that could be the first explanation. Although I'm sure if we look at the report in greater detail, and even the reports like the 2017 reports, which covers the 2016 period, I'm sure more clarity will be provided there. But Leo, you can add to that.
Yes, yes, that's true, Jackie. And Kenya, after the 2010 constitution, recognized recognized community land, but also there was clarity around land administration. Then there have been massive settling programs for Kenya, and also for the case of for the case of for the case of Rwanda. For the Rwanda for the case of Rwanda. But additionally, remember in after 20 during that period after between 2013 to 2016, the World Bank Ease of Doing Business index was one of the most popular indices around this region, and part of it was measures tied around property rights, and governments within this region started to improve regulations on the enjoyment of property rights, and that helped really helped to improve that within the EAC. Also, additionally, also on property, there are other indirect effects from that, the harmonization of the common market protocol. So that it allowed countries to adopt almost all similar measures on issues related to trade and now trade interfaces with property rights. That in itself played a big role. Yeah, but that's an excellent observation.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Jairus. Does anyone have a question? Anyone have a question that you'd like to ask orally? Any clarification? Anyone else? Anyone who has any observations that you'd like to speak to? I'm giving you the opportunity to speak now. No one. I do not see any hand up. Okay. So because I do not see any hand up, I will take it that you are all satisfied with our responses and with the presentation, and you have nothing useful to add. So I will just ask Leo to make his closing remarks, and then we will close this meeting. Leo.
So thank you so much, and we hope to continue looking at the index of economic freedom, how it affects our daily lives, how it affects state fragility, and how it advances prosperity. Our main aim as a think tank is to have a free market, but also to be able to see that prosperity within the generation, and it's something that is possible. This is something that is very possible to see. Other countries like Poland have seen within a generation, Australia and others. So that's our main aim when we're looking at this, and when we are looking at an index that only takes account of data and in very few areas qualitative responses. So thank you very much, and looking forward to this, and looking forward to seeing you in future year webinars. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Leo. So yes, we conclude here. Yes, there are no questions. So we conclude here. Thank you very much to all of you who took time to join us for this discussion. We hope it has been helpful. As Leo said, we intend to continue tracking this. So we will call you again when the next issue is available. As we mentioned, we reiterate that As the CLE program and also as IEA, we think that economic freedoms matter. Advancing economic freedoms is essential for countries' greater growth and prosperity. And basically, such discussions are useful in terms of shaping better, more inclusive, open policies and better institutions. So that's why we've been doing this and we intend to continue. So thank you to all of you. Thanks for the questions asked. Deborah and Amolo, who asked about the presentation. All our presentations are usually available on IEA's website immediately after the presentation. However, if you'd like us to email you, because I saw a specific request for an email, maybe you can share with me your email address, type it here quickly before we conclude, and we will send it to you. But for anyone else, you can visit the IEA website, and if you go to our resources section, publications, reports, under presentations, you will see it. In the next few minutes, it will be available. So thanks, everyone. We wish you, yes, I've seen it, Deborah. So thanks, everyone. And the IEA is a membership institution. So for those of you who are not members, please, you can reach out to us. Our communications team, Oscar, will be able to help you and guide you to be a member.